First of all, thank you very much for your attention. I know this has been a difficult process being away from your home, but again, your jobs are important to the community and we appreciate it. As I discussed with you on opening, there are a lot of things that just don't make a whole lot of sense in this case. A lot of what I'll call oddities, a lot of weird stuff, just things that will not allow you to reach a verdict beyond a reasonable doubt. Beyond a reasonable doubt, your mind has to rest easy that you're doing the right thing, that they proved each and every element, and they're just a lot of questions that have gone unanswered. And I'm going to review them with you in a moment, but ladies and gentlemen, the state has not met their burden. Couple things. One, right off the top, is we talk about law enforcement doing their job. The fire happened at 4:51, or the first call. Whitwell Fire Department did come pretty quickly. The fire was put out pretty quickly, and by 5:35, the fire was out. They didn't call the violent crime response team for about 4 hours. 4 hours. Their name, Violent Crime Response Team, they're the ones who obviously should have been called, but it wasn't done. Who knows what happened in that crime scene before then? Firefighters went in. Now, they're doing their job. They're not thinking about protecting a crime scene. They're concerned about putting out a fire, as they should be, okay? But they have to track in stuff on their feet, on their hands. They're not thinking about protecting a crime scene, and rightly so. But nevertheless, they still have to bring in DNA evidence. And when I say DNA evidence, their own DNA, other people's DNA, they're tracking stuff in. They're spraying water, which they need to do, obviously, to put out the fire. Nobody's really faulting them for that. Nobody's talked about how that messes with the crime scene, so to speak. There were other things, law enforcement, Rodney Easterly was there. Nobody was keeping track. What equipment, personal protective equipment, you heard about that. Nobody really kept track of what was going in to the crime scene. You had somebody from the Violent Crime Response Team, Laura Hodge, say, well, they make sure they take their gloves with them. They don't leave things at the crime scene. And then you have somebody else from basically bomb and arson saying they drop their gloves so they don't show cross-contamination. Not really quite sure how that doesn't mean, that means they didn't show cross-contamination. But you got Laura Hodge saying they do it their way to preserve the scene, and you got somebody else saying something different. We're talking about gloves. One oddity is you had Randy Mosier come in and say it was a blue glove. I assure you Randy Mosier didn't want to be here today. He testified to that, and he says he may have told somebody that she was wearing sneakers or Skechers, okay? You heard Mark Wilson say they were in evidence. Why didn't they test that? And by the way, there's certain evidence like the dollar bills. If they're her stuff, you would think DNA would be on there. Why isn't DNA on her stuff? DNA is in the truck. You saw a little bit of the DNA is in her DNA is in the red Colorado. Of course it is. It's her truck. I would expect my DNA to be in my truck or my vehicle. They talk about her boots having all this DNA. Well, she's wearing the boots that they say have this DNA. She's driving to Colorado. Why isn't all the blood, DNA, why didn't that transfer into the truck? You heard about transfer. They didn't find that. Didn't transfer. She drives with the right foot. Didn't transfer. Why? That knife. You saw the knife in evidence, the 3-blade case knife. Well, Mr. Ridge's blood is on there, according to the state, according to the government. His DNA is on there, according to the government. Where's her DNA? She handled it. Where is everybody else's DNA who handled it? When you go to, you get arrested at Foster Falls and they put you in handcuffs, they pat you down and take a knife. They're supposed to do that. I don't think they did that in this case. I don't know. Certainly there is no evidence as to what happened because nobody testified about that. They go to the jail, and the jailer, I think, was fairly honest. She doesn't remember how they got the knife. She does know that there was no argument from Miss Kilgore or from Angela. She didn't fuss when she came in. She didn't fight. There is no evidence throughout all this that she fussed or fight. If she just burnt down the pawn shop, if she just did this crime, why isn't she running for the hills? Why isn't she running as far as she can? It just doesn't make sense. One of those oddities. They're talking about hiding, taking off the rebel flag in front and going back and with little decals. You saw the pictures. It's a big red truck. Where are you hiding with a big red truck? Did she hide? She got arrested at Foster Falls, 20 minutes away. How much did she hide? Why was she hiding? Who was she hiding from? She cooperated. She went voluntarily to the Whitwell Police Department to talk to them. You heard Darren Rogers. Nothing unusual about her. She talked, voluntarily went to the police, acting normal. You heard Mr. Mosier say she was acting normal in the store. Heard about Jerry Ridge's death or the fire in the pawn shop. She didn't run. She didn't say, oh, they're after me. She said, go ahead, call the police. They came, she went to talk to them. You heard Dale Watts, who was in the store left about 3:35. She's the one with the receipt. She was in there, with her grandchild. They went out to the truck and they were playing with the puppy. Is that doesn't make sense. That isn't consistent. We talk about the knife. They found a knife, but no keys. I don't know. Where are the keys? They didn't find that. Why go through paying, Jerry Ridge, there was that talk about that receipt. Apparently she paid $4,000 for a promissory note, and some other things are written in the receipt, and that's in evidence. I guess they're saying she paid the $4,000 and stole it back. I don't get that. They went to her her garage with a search warrant. They didn't take anything of evidence. Well, the saddles, what about the saddles? That was on the receipt. Why didn't they take that into evidence? Why? Why didn't they take the blue gloves into evidence? They took nothing. What were they? They took nothing. That just is odd. Let's talk about a couple more odd things. Mr. Tethero's fingerprint was found on a knife. The only fingerprint found in this whole case. They say, oh, this felon was up in Campbell County at the time. He couldn't have done it. Well, they didn't look into his relationship with Mr. Tethero. They just said, hey, on the telephone, they apparently called him and said, was Tethero there? And the probation officer, well, he said it was only one conversation. Mr. Collins said it was only one conversation. And he was a little unsure, but he said one conversation. Then you heard Mr. Johnson say, well, he remembers there being confusion, but doesn't remember the details. And then we went into it, and he told Mr. Tethero, what happens if your probation officer says you're not there? And he goes, no way. Mr. Johnson said, well, he did. And then, why would he say that if he didn't know that there was a discrepancy? And this discrepancy was several weeks later. He has in the computer a different day, 3 weeks later. It's not something like, oh, he realized the next day there was a problem. And I'm talking about Mr. Collins. Doesn't make sense. So he changed a state report later on. Really not sure. There's talked about forensic exams. We talk of computers, of tracking people. They just took his word that he was there. Why didn't they track cell phones? Why didn't they look forensically at his computer? They did a lot of forensic evidence. They're here to tell you about Ms. Kilgore, but nothing with Mr. Collins and Mr. Tethero. They just picked up the phone and said, oops, that's good enough. I don't get it. They didn't swab the receipt book. There's all this talk about the receipt book. Why else do you have, why else do you have a receipt book in the shop, in the pawn shop, if you're not going to use it? Okay? They're talking about Post-it notes, and there are Post-it notes writing down payments and that, but he had a receipt book. There's no testimony about what was before the receipt book, but it looks like there was writing. No testimony about that, but they didn't investigate it. And again, why do you have a receipt book in the shop if you're not going to use it? Mr. Tethero, going back to him, he's a Grundy County resident going up to Campbell County. How convenient. You can have your probation transferred. That doesn't make sense. A couple other things. There was a bullet in the body bag at the autopsy. You're talking about all this personal protective equipment and stuff like that, but a bullet winds up in a body bag in Nashville, miles away, hundreds of miles away, that has nothing to do with his death. Why isn't it still at the crime scene? They didn't even realize it. They took an x-ray and then they saw it. That's odd. The gunshot residue, okay, negative. You heard the person testify, well, 6-7 hours, it's gone. You know, normal wear and tear. Well, then why did they take it? Why did they take it? But it's still negative. Couple, again, 451 a fire, 8:53, the VCR team is notified, and they have to come from Nashville, 2.5 hours. They're not here until after 12:22, I believe. But then you have Darby Hutchison, who isn't sure whether they did the investigation before or after, but she remembered seeing the VCRT team come. Well, obviously that means she's there before. Doesn't make sense. I'm just going through the list of evidence. You had that big black lock blade knife found on her along with the case knife. I don't know, but I guess theory is from the state that she opened up the lock blade, the case knife, when she had this big black lock blade knife that she could have opened up and stabbed something. Why? Doesn't make sense. And you heard, they first thought it was that knife that was the murder weapon. Agent Wilson, I believe, said that. He was honest. He said they thought that was it. Well, of course they did, because everybody would normally think that. That doesn't make sense. They don't even know how the knives got into the jail or got into evidence. A couple further things. Again, we go through the list. They made a big deal about the money. Well, I guess out of the $5,000 or $10,000, maybe have stole the $4,000 back or whatever. She didn't go get a new truck to run, because all she did was take off the rebel flag, according to them, to run away. A big red truck. I don't get that. Let's talk about more guns. There were guns in the pawn shop parking lot, basically, in a van. Nobody investigated that. You know, you have an ATF person who's a member of the task force with ATF and their guns in the parking lot, but nobody really could tell us about that. You know, there were guns stolen. If there's something going on, you know, I would think they would want to investigate that regardless, but it seems like they kind of just buried their head. You heard Agent Johnson, Detective Johnson, say, I work for the Marion County Sheriff's Department. I asked him who told him to do his job. But we're here on the Kilgore case. He says Bo Burnett a bunch of years ago. That was an evasive answer. Just Laura Hodge. One of the key things here is the glove. She's a TBI agent. You saw her testify. She admitted TBI teaches them how to testify. I mean, I don't get what's that. You don't know how to tell the truth? I don't know. But she didn't remember about the glove and the garbage can. That could have led to cross-contamination. I mean, you heard Darren Rogers. He didn't like to go into the garbage cans in the bathroom, and I see why. I mean, I get it. But these TBI agents and Laura Hodge with gloves on, personal protective equipment so they don't cross-contaminate, doesn't remember when there's garbage in the garbage fingerprints. The only fingerprint, Cody Rowlett testified, and he was there at the scene. If there was another fingerprint, he was the fingerprint guy. He knows how to pick it up and get it and look for it. That was only on a knife that Mr. Pettigrew took. That knife, by the way, where's that DNA? Picked it up. Where's Mr. Ridge's DNA on that? It was in his shop. Let's talk about the shirt from the Chevy Colorado. There were 3 people listed on that. Exhibit 31A, back of the left sleeve. There was blood, human hemoglobin not tested, maybe it was animal blood, consistent with a mix of at least 3 people. You heard Ms. Bergie, when she's taking out the calculator, maybe before, maybe after, or I gave her the calculator. There's something called transfer. You shake somebody's hand or whatever, and it goes from one place to another. Submit to you, that's what happened in this case, or some of it. There's accelerant found on the receipt book. There's a medium petroleum distillate found. Well, the lighter fluid is a light distillate. You testified to that. There was no, and I think I said this, but again, if they did all this DNA, what about the DNA in the driver's seat? She's driving, all that transfer. I mean, everybody knows how when they drive a car, it's going to be on the brake, or they're probably going to touch the side of the car. Where's all that blood? They didn't touch the sketches. Again, seen by a whole bunch of people playing with a dog, a puppy, a dog, seeing other people. This is not the demeanor, not the way somebody acts who just committed a crime, as heinous as they say this is, and it is. I mean, Mr. Ridge did not deserve to die, or anything happened to him, but my client didn't do it. We believe somebody else did it, or we know somebody else did it, but she didn't do it. And we would ask at the end of this case that you return guilty of not guilty. One more thing. The state is going to get a chance to get up after me and say, oh, this, called rebuttal. I don't get to get up again, but what I do get to do is ask you, since I don't get to get up and say, hey, what would Mr. Lipton say in rebuttal? What would Angela say in response to the state's getting up? A couple minutes after they didn't tell you what they were thinking in my case. What would Mr. Lipton say? What would Angela say? What would Norman say about their case? I don't get to get up, but I'm going to ask you to do that for me. And once again, on behalf of Angela Kilgore, myself, Jeff Harmon, we thank you for the attention. Thank you.